Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
What would happen if Joe Biden won the U.S. presidency? We're going to be discussing today about the Jewish and Israeli concerns about the potential outcome of a Biden presidency and Obama's involvement in the 2020 election. Why is Obama involved in this 2020 election? It's almost like the Russian involvement, you know? I mean, he shouldn't be involved. I'm thinking Biden wants anything. His handlers want him to choose a black woman as a vice president. I don't have a problem with that, but basing it on color and race, etc., that to me is racist. I think he should just take whoever the best candidate is, whether male or female, whether white or black. Doesn't matter to me. I just want to see the best people up there, right? Otherwise, it's racist. So if he's going to take a black woman, why not already take Michelle Obama? I'm sure she has ambitions to be the president of the United States in the future. This will be her key to get in. Of course, that's not going to happen right now, but we're going to be discussing the concerns that Israel and the Jewish people have about the potential outcome of a Biden presidency. Also, the coronavirus, how much of it is concern for our health and safety, and how much of it is political? We're going to be talking about that as well. There's a joke going around when someone asks their doctor, they say, Doc, how long is Corona going to be around? And he says, I don't know. Don't ask me. I'm just a doctor. Ask a politician. Something like that. In any case, you're listening to the Tamar Yonah Show here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. This is a live show. If you're listening on Monday morning here in the Holy Land of Israel, or if it's late Sunday night on the U.S. Eastern Time Zone, that means that we are live and you can call into the show. Hi to everybody who's in the chat room and who's listening in from all over the world. It's great to see you here. And we'll be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we're exploring now what would happen if Joe Biden won the U.S. presidency. What are the Jewish and Israeli concerns about the potential outcome of a Biden presidency? And what is Obama's involvement in the 2020 election? Well, here to tell us more about that, we have as our guest Barry Shaw. He is the International Public Diplomacy Director at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. His books include Fighting Hamas, BDS and Anti-Semitism, BDS for Idiots, and 1917 From Palestine to Israel. They're all available on Amazon or at Israel's Steinmatsky bookstores. You can visit his websites at strategic-israel.org and theviewfromisrael.com. Welcome to the show, Barry Shaw.
Hi, Tamar. Thanks for having me on again.
Good morning. It's good to have you on. So you have some news for us about if, God forbid, I say God forbid, for not just for Israel, but for Americans as well, that Joe Biden would win the U.S. presidency.
Yeah, well, before getting on the issues of the significance of the American Jewish vote in the 2020 election, I want to use your program to do an overview into Obama and his involvement in the direction that America is going. Now, there's much about Obama that's really been kept under wraps, but anybody involved in international affairs and strategic studies must view world figures through the prism of evidence available to them. So basically, let me give a wrap about what we know about Obama very quickly. He was raised with respect for Islam and the Muslim faith. Nothing wrong with that on his face, but it shows a bias. He was raised by parents, including a white woman who with the far left leanings. He was mentored by Frank Marshall Davis, a pro-Soviet, pro-Red China communist. The book called The Communist actually tells how young Obama sought out Davis and absorbed everything that Davis taught him. He was guided by the writings of Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals. Saul Alinsky wrote this in Chicago, which was Obama's hometown. And he was also influenced by the Cloud Piven's guidelines on aims of community organizing and changing local and national governments, and how the use of power on people to ride into power and then control the people. His close friends included Bill Ayers, a revolutionary terrorist, Rashid Khalili, and he attended the services of the Goddamn America preacher, the Reverend Jeremiah Wright.
I remember that.
That? And he's married to a woman who said that the day that Obama was elected president was the first day in her life she was proud to be an American. So you can tell from this the character of Barack Obama. And he got there because he organized and orchestrated what he had been taught and practiced during his Chicago days on a national scale on massive community organization and personal charisma. Tamar, you and I know the Americans love charisma more than anything else.
They called him the cult of personality. Go ahead.
Correct. Now, he made a promise to the American people to fundamentally change America, and they thought it was cute. They didn't understand the portent of his message, and they still don't understand what his presidency was all about or what is happening today. Obama knew that he couldn't achieve everything he wanted to do to fundamentally change America in his own presidential term, but he was determined to make the basic changes and bring America down in size globally, to be on equal, not superior terms with other countries. This is part of his globalization. He went on an apology tour to Muslim countries. He lost millions of jobs for America, put many millions on food stamps due to his policies of globalization that closed tens of thousands of factories to jobs to places like communist China and Mexico. He tried to nationalize the health service as a first step to nationalizing everything. Now, remember his promise to America that you can keep your doctor and keep your plan. That was a lie. He defunded and depleted the American military. He was the first president to lose an American ambassador, Stevens, who was abandoned to an Islamic terror group in Benghazi on another lie, that a mob angry about an amateur video made in America was caused the violence. Peaceful protesters, if you like. His meddling in Libya led to the fall of Gaddafi and into the warring hellhole we see today. His meaningless red lines in Syria over Assad's use of chemical weapons open up Syria to the Russians and the Iranians. He called ISIS the JV team that allowed them to run rampant as they slaughtered the way across the Middle East, including, of course, beheading Americans. He made a foul deal with the Iran, including gifting them $150 billion in cash, which they used to force their way through Iraq and Syria to Israel's border as they funded both Hamas and Hezbollah, as well as their own proxies in Yemen. And as his final act, he stabbed Israel in the back in the United Nations Security Council in a historic moment of spite against Bibi's stand against his Iran deal. Now, During his presidency, he targeted conservative voices in America with the use of the IRS and his Department of Justice. And then he co-opted his various intelligence agencies, the FBI and his Department of Justice, to go after a political opponent by ordering the spying on the Trump campaign when it became clear that Donald Trump was on his way to being the main rival to Hillary Clinton. He didn't want to have his legacy lose out, or Hillary Clinton progresses his revolutionary fundamental changes to America either. The Russian collusion, the special counsel, his hand was behind it all, as we're about to see with the Barr-Durham investigation. Obama and Biden, of course, Tamar, they won't be targeted for criminal charges, but they're deeply implicated. And it's how the Obama Oval Office operated as evidence in the revelation of a January 2017 meeting during the transition period that took place, and the decision to go after General Flynn, Trump's new national intelligence chief, who had a lot of the dirt on Obama. And so today, why is Obama spending his time developing an organization operating out of his Washington, D.C. offices, headed by Valerie Jarrett, his early negotiator with Iran, by the way, an organization that has a budget of tens of millions of dollars with 250 branches nationwide and a staff of 32,000 purportedly involved in community organization connected to working to win the White House for Joe Biden? You would have to be naive to think that Obama is that altruistic. So what's the issue of absentee ballots? Why is it so important to the Democrats as they accuse Trump of wanting to steal the election?
Right.
As they're doing it themselves. You can tell that the Democrats are planning that by the way that they project their own sins onto their opponent. In this case, Trump, whether he wants to be stealing election or stealing up things like racial divide and violence, all Democratic tactics, all part of the deflection methods of Saul Alinsky and Cloud Piven.
Barry, I have to interrupt you here because I have to remind our listeners that already the left is setting up Trump as saying that, are you going to accept the election results? That's what they've asked him already. And his answer, Trump's answer was, I don't know. Because he says, if you're going to be doing these mail-in ballots, you're probably going to be cheating. And I don't know if I'm going to accept it. And so now they're screaming that he's not going to leave the White House. He has things up his sleeve. He's going to cheat in the elections. And they're already setting it up that if Trump wins, America's going to burn. That's what I see. Go ahead.
And if, of course, Trump insists on sticking to the traditional methods of voting in America, they will also, should he win, they will also use that to carry on their anti-Trump campaign in a Trump second term because they really want to steal the election. It's that simple, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So this leads me to the obvious conclusion that a Biden presidency will actually be a Obama third term in which he'll harness the truly radical elements that we can see on the streets of America today to fill his political ambitions to fundamentally change America in the image of his own political upbringing. And all the elements are in place. Black Lives Matter and Antifa will continue the destabilization of major towns in America. The local economies will continue to suffer. The Democrat establishment will continue to include their wasteful demand for trillions of dollars on issues unrelated to reviving Trump economy or helping out small business owners or even helping the blacks in the inner cities. He is not structurally changing the way things are done, leaving to an election and people control because he's bored in his retirement. He's working to a plan. He wants to restructure America, and he wants to use the first 4 years of a new Democratic administration to push his agenda to become the Secretary General at the end of the day of the United Nations. And if you have any doubt, let's see who is selected to be Biden's pick as his vice president, right? It won't be Biden's personal pick. It'll be other people's selection. And my guess, Tamar, is it's going to be either Kamala Harris, Susan Rice, or even Valerie Jarrett, you can see that the hand that Obama is pulling the strings. Now, How long have we got left?
Well, we have to go to a break actually right now. So you can talk about that when we get back. And again, if anybody wants to call in with any comments or questions, you can do so. Our numbers are on the top of our homepage at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. You can call in. We are live if you're listening on Monday morning Israel time or late Sunday night U.S. Eastern time. That means that we're live. We'll be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Simonto from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simonto, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
Modesty at the beach? It isn't just about body image. It's about feeling good. Modest swimsuits, so we don't get burned by the sun.
So we won't get ogled by strangers.
So we'll feel free to express ourselves without the need to expose ourselves.
Let Marcy Modest help you to cover up what you want, how you want.
Made in Israel.
Visit marcymodest.com. That's MARSEA modest.com.
And get a 10% discount on your first purchase.
2 new shows on Israel News Talk Radio.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we're back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we're asking the question, what would happen if Joe Biden won the U.S. presidency, and the Jewish and Israeli concerns about the potential outcome of a Biden presidency? Also, Obama's involvement in these 2020 elections, and where is that going to lead us? Here to tell us more about that, we have joining us Barry Shaw. Barry, in the last segment, you wanted to say something, but we got cut off by the break. Go ahead.
Well, I think what you're finding in America, that even most Americans can talk here about American Jews, but generally American who traditionally vote Democrat will vote for Biden, even appreciating that he hasn't got the capabilities that he had. Not that he had any great capabilities in the 50 years he's been in Washington, D.C. But But basically, you have to understand that Biden will be nothing more than a figurehead. I describe him as the equivalent in America as Queen Elizabeth in Britain. Queen Elizabeth lives in Buckingham Palace, but the power and the politics is handled somewhere else. You will see a change in the appearance of an American presidency. Biden will be there basically to be a figurehead, to trot him out on state occasions, to talk about, make speeches that are off teleprompters, and to meet dignitaries. But the decision making is going to be made in other places. And Tamar, we see the insanity in America growing worse and more violent by the day. Perpetrators of the Black Lives Matter mob and the Antifa anarchists, it's Marxism hand in hand with anarchy. But the major perpetrators have been the horrible Democratic mayors and governors who have given the maniacs carte blanche in what they do today. They open the door to the arsonists, the looters, the destroyers, and yes, the killers as well, to do whatever they want to shackle their law enforcement officers. And when Trump wants to restore law and order and send in National Guards to protect federal property and buildings, as he's obliged to do as President of the United States, he's called a dictator, or his federal agents are called stormtroopers by Nazi Pelosi, comparing them to Nazis, for instance. This is Nancy Pelosi, the head of the House in D.C. The Democratic mayors broke all their new owned orders to allow mass protests, saying that they help exercise civil rights, refused to arrest those who murder and maim, but threatened law-abiding citizens with arrest and potential $10,000 fines and 5 years in prison for protecting their lives and their property, as happened in St. Louis to a couple there. Had a mob who was threatening to kill them, kill their dogs, steal their property, burn their house down. And yet those people got off free. And this couple were facing, until very recently, arrest. This is ridiculous. This is Democrat America, cities and states. And you can imagine what's going to happen if this is carried out on a national level within the government, which is certainly going to be more radical. I mean, can you imagine a House or even a Senate full of more people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar? I mean, can you imagine a situation where Ilhan Omar, instead of sitting as a member of the U.S. Foreign Affairs Committee, is actually heading the Foreign Affairs Committee? All this is quite possible and could happen under a Biden administration. And those people that are being convinced that Trump is the worst president America ever had are aware of the violence, but they think that when Biden and the Democrats take power, all this is going to ease up. Not a chance. It's only going to get worse. The intolerance under the authority that they vote will give these hardened socialists, will make their lives miserable. They'll find themselves trapped in an intolerance that any normal liberal expression, the thought police, will punish anyone who thinks, writes, or speaks their mind. I mean, basically, we get this already. How many of your listeners, for instance, have been blocked on Twitter and Facebook and places like that? It means the thought police are already in action. They're going to be voting for a government which will be carrying out quite a number of the Black Lives Matter manifesto, including destruction of the traditional family structure as we know it, as father, mother, and kids, one that doesn't believe that God exists in their new dogma. No God, no family, no faith, no private property. Read the Black Lives Matter manifesto. And American Jews find this far better than having Trump in the White House. Have they no morals, no sense, no vision about where it's leading? And to be honest, Tamar, I'm in despair. When I read the moronic comments of some Jews posted on my Facebook and Twitter pages, they are so full of Trump derangement syndrome that they can't see the dark forest for the trees. Too many Democratic leaders stand against Israel right now because they're mired in anti-Semitism. And the next lot that will be ushered into Washington are going to be worse. One by one, the pro-Israeli Democrats are losing their seats to people who support the Palestinians against us. Elliot Engel was the most recent Democratic Jew to be turfed out by the radical community activists, and he won't be the last. So there are those like, for instance, Alan Dershowitz, a liberal and a lifelong Democrat, who knows his party, he's lost in his party, but basically still clinging on like someone who knows death is approaching but still in denial. And I really think that after the election, if the Democrats win and Biden is elected president, that everything will calm down. It will be business as normal. And I'm here to tell Professor Dershowitz that you're dangerously disillusional if you think that's going to happen. So what people like Dershowitz has to do is what any self-respecting Jew did in Britain when it was clear that the British Labour Party was mired in hardened socialist policies and was sinking into a poisoned well of anti-Israelism and anti-Semitism, which expressed itself with anti-Israel resolutions and priorities if it came to power. You know what? And as I said in Britain, Jews and non-Jews came to their senses just before the election and walked away. And I hope to hear that Dershowitz take the clear-headed step of declaring that his party has left him and that he cannot bring himself to vote Democrat in November. This was a cry we heard over and over again from Jews and non-Jews in Britain who said, they didn't leave the Labour Party left them.
Right.
And this is what American Jews should be saying about the Democrat Party in America today. If you care about your faith, if you care about your family values, if you care, for instance, about Israel.
Barry, let me ask you this. What would happen if there was a Biden presidency? How would that affect Israel? I mean, we've seen that Netanyahu was going to put sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. He wanted to do it when there's a friendly president and one that would support this move. And now that's not happening. It's been stalled. And also the idea of Iran. I mean, right now we understand. We don't have proof because no one's admitting to it. But the United States and Israel working together against Iran. There's all these mysterious explosions and things happening in Iran. That this is something that some critics are assuming that they want to start a war now before Trump is out of office in case he doesn't get elected. What do you have to say about that?
Well, the Democrat manifesto talks about still supporting a two-state solution, still supporting Israel, etc., but that's a fig leaf. Once you see the real face of who is going to be in Washington, D.C., controlling the Democratic Party, that manifesto is going to be ripped up piece by piece. It's not going to be Biden who's going to decide where he stands on Israel. It's going to be the radical elements. And I have news for people like Chuck Schumer, Jerry Nadler, and Nancy Pelosi. She thinks she controls the House right now, and Schumer thinks he controls the Senate. But I can tell you that once the people come into power and get their feet under the table and start ganging up, you will find that new people, the radicals, will be taking over from Nancy Pelosi and from Schumer, and then will be bringing in their policies and their own manifesto. And within the first term of a Biden presidency, you will see things change. And you will see this by people who are elected to positions of power in the House and in the Senate, but also outside, also in the United Nations. Who do you think is going to be the United Nations representative? Somebody nice and polite and somebody who's been pro-Israel all his life, or somebody who's going to be pro-Palestinian, for instance? And what's going to happen when, for instance, any resolutions probably also proposed by the United States in the General Assembly go to the Security Council? Do you think America will impose its veto? And if America doesn't bring in its veto against an anti-Israel resolution, do you think any other country is going to do it? China, Russia, perhaps? No way.
Well, let's talk about China for a moment, because there's a lot of friction now and tensions with the United States and China, with the United States closing one of their consulates in Texas and the Chinese now closing in a U.S. consulate in China.
Yeah, well, I mean, Trump obviously didn't want to do that because he had made a new deal with China, one which would be best for America, bringing thousands, if not millions of jobs and factories back to America. It was a good deal. And then we were hit with the Wuhan virus and the misbehavior of China, not only within China by hiding the the origins of it, but actually taking advantage of the weak situation in the world, the death and destruction and the economic destruction as well. And now, of course, he's coming down on the fact that China has been spying on America, stealing its intellectual property, and he's been closing down, as any proper U.S. president would do.
Okay, Barry, hold that thought because we have to go to a break. Sorry to interrupt you. We're going to be right back, everybody. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to call into the show and ask your questions or make your comment. We'll be right back, everybody.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
We live in the age of information, but not inspiration. If you're like me, you're looking to be inspired to reach higher, to connect more, and to grow. Well, if you want to get warm, you need to stand close to the fire. And if you want to catch fire, you need to stand close enough to get hit by the sparks. Join me, Penina Taylor, as we walk with people who have embarked on a spiritual journey towards Torah. We'll uncover what started them on their journey and what truths they discovered along the way. So prepare to be inspired as we take a leap of faith every Sunday at 5 p.m. on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we're back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we're talking about what would happen with a Biden presidency. How would that affect the Jewish people in Israel and Obama's involvement in it as well? We're going to be touching on the coronavirus. How much of it is about our health and how much of it is political? Our guest is Barry Shaw. He's the International Public Diplomacy Director at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Barry, go ahead.
Right. Well, I want to address this part to American Jews. I know I can understand that traditionally they've always found a political home in the Democratic Party. And I mentioned about Dershowitz of taking a clear step and do what Jews and non-Jews did in Britain and walk away from the Labour Party. I understand also that Dershowitz maybe not be able to bring himself to vote for Trump or vote for the Republicans, even though a black civil rights lawyer, once passionate Democrat, Leo Terrell, recently publicly announced he will be voting for Trump. And the straw that broke his back was when Biden said in the TV interview to a black interviewer that if you vote Trump, you ain't black. And that, Terrell said, was just the latest racial stir by the man who has made anti-black racist statements all his political career. So, I understand also why if you're Jewish Democrats in America can't bring themselves to vote Republican, but to give their vote to this sort of new radical Marxist anarchist government that's going to take place should be a warning to them. And yet Jewish Democrats seem to me to be remaining in denial that this is happening in the party. Conservatives get banned and thrown out of jobs, but Linda Sarsour and Ilhan Omar get promoted and supported within the Democratic Party including with their Jewish hatred. And yet American Jews can't see it. In the American Democratic Party, not one congressman came to Jerusalem for the opening of the U.S. Embassy in our capital, not one. Out of the 28 Jewish members of Congress, 26 of them are Democrats. They weren't there. They didn't come. They didn't condemn their fellow Democrats who come out with their Jew hatreds either. Yet Jews like Dershowitz will continue to vote for them. The Democratic Party is growing closer to CARE and to the Muslim Brotherhood on policy as they grow further away from Israel, and yet Jews will vote for them. 17 members of Congress voted against the bill banning boycotts of Israel, and 16 of the 17 Democrats were Democrats, and yet Jews continue to vote for them. The modern American left is not willing to combat or disavow anti-Semitism of any kind, and yet the American Jews will vote for them. This is absolutely astounding. The evidence is there in front of their eyes, and yet they will still go to the poll to vote for this sort of next government that's coming along that intends to absolutely in the words of Obama, fundamentally change America for the worst. And the Jews and Israel are going to be some of the early victims. The Jews because of the Jews because they're white. Because, quite frankly, they may support the Black Lives Matter, but the Black Lives Matter is the most racist organization in the United States, and their target are whites and their target are Jews. You can see this already on the streets and scrawled on synagogues. Their anti-Semitism, their hatred for Israel is there for all to see, and yet American Jews will vote for them.
And they're already talking about Jewish privilege now. Have you seen those things? Okay. All right. So, let's look at the left and their tactics and what they're doing. They're using now also the coronavirus in order to, they're using it as a political, strong arm as well. Can you tell us about that?
Well, the coronavirus also is, I've heard in some places, it's the Jews and Israel was behind it. It's another Zionist trick. Obviously, people don't go for that sort of conspiracy theory, but it seems, like I said, the American Jews are either blind or they're so obsessed with anti-Trump, despite the fact that up to the start of the coronavirus effect in America, America was way on its way back to a prosperity they had never heard before. Trump, this racist, had actually brought about more jobs to blacks, Hispanics, Asian, than any other president before them. He brought more jobs and prosperity back. He brought more people off food stamps, and he was also taking measures to aid America with opportunity zones and criminal reforms and things like that. And yet he's a racist. I really think American Jews are supposed to be intelligent people. I would suggest take off the blinkers, stop watching CNN, and really understand what's going on. Read some of the things I'm telling you about. Read the book, The Communist, that came out. Read the book that Obama was caught, photographed, about a non-American world. Read about Saul Alinsky. Read about Claude Pivin. Understand what is happening in America, and it's starting from the communities heading all the way into power.
Do you believe that there's any connection between all of the public demonstrations, protests, rioting, etc., and the spread of the coronavirus? Because the United States is right up there at the top of people who have been diagnosed with the flu. Yes, go ahead.
If we did it stupidly by the Israeli government releasing people from lockdown and having stupid Israelis gathering in pubs and clubs and entertainment centers and dancing and have a great time, fine. But then it led to an upkick, that's part of the reason for the recent upkick that Israel is fighting about.
Well, I'm talking about the United States as well.
But to do it in America, what America did is the Democratic mayors and Democratic governments insisted that people couldn't make a living, had to go into lockdown. And at the same time, then they allowed people in their masses to go on the street and calling it a healthy exercise in civil society.
Right.
I mean, it's madness. And then can you understand why in America there was a second upkick as well?
Well, as if the coronavirus can identify, this one's a leftist, so we'll leave him alone, right?
Yeah, but it's all part of the master plan of causing dismantlement, disruption, destruction, and also demoralization. Read again also the Black Lives Matter manifesto, and you'll understand exactly the formula that they're using for changing the way that people think or behave. And it's part of the destruction of the economy, the demoralization of the people. At such a time you go into an election, you're looking for change. And if people think the change is going to be in a benign democratic government headed by the benign Biden with some nice people around him, they're living in another delusional world.
So in the last 3 minutes that we have in the show, what would you like to leave us with?
Okay, well, I know you asked me to talk about some corona stuff from Israel. Okay, so I think it's important for people who may be planning in the future, in a month or so, to come to Israel, or Israelis or others about to leave, that in fact there's a plan in place right now for the airports authority to allow this, that Israeli travelers, 72 hours before their flight, passengers will get screened for coronavirus at one of the drive-through testing stations and will receive the results on their mobile phones. And if the tests come back negative for the virus, the passengers will be able to go to the airport where they'll take a second test, and then the results will be received by the travelers when you arrive at your destination abroad, so that you can present 2 negative tests to the immigration of whichever countries you've arrived at. Now, foreigners coming to enter Israel, the visitors would arrive at the airport, that's Ben Gurion Airport, and immediately be screened. They would then have to enter isolation for around 24 hours while awaiting the results of their tests. And if the tests are negative, they can be able to continue with their vacation or whatever they want to do in Israel. But if the test is positive, the visitors will have to remain in quarantine, and that's isolation that will be between 10 and 14 days. Now, as I said, this is a tender that's going out within 3 weeks to select the company that's going to be able to run the tests at Ben Gurion Airport in conjunction with the field testing that's going on. And the final decision about opening Ben Gurion will be made in collaboration with the Health Ministry and the National Security Council and the Prime Minister's Office.
Ben Gurion is the airport, the international airport here, by the way. Go ahead.
I was talking about Ben Gurion Airport here. All right. So, I mean, basically, I think that's a bit of a guideline. It's not going to happen next week. It's going to be about 2-3 weeks before the airport authority have gone out to tender and pick the company that's going to operate this. And it's going to take a week or two in order for that company to set up and everything. So possibly, hopefully, we could be looking at this towards the end of August, beginning of September.
Okay, and note to American voters, again about the U.S. presidency that's coming up, the elections?
No, well, I think Yonah said up to now has been pretty strong enough, but I really advise Americans, Jewish and not Jewish, to really open their eyes to find out what's going on, do their own research. You know, a lot of people involved in strategic affairs and international studies I looked into this, and it's quite obvious to us what's going on. And therefore, you know, you're not going to get the sort of government you think you're going to get.
All right. Well, I think that those words are very, very true. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show, Barry Shaw, and giving us an update on what's going on how the Jewish and Israeli, how the presidential elections can influence what's going on here and what we have to be aware of. Thank you for coming on the show.
One last question.
Yes.
A sentence that if people think that I'm Barry Shaw talking conspiracy theories, listen out for who is going to be Joe Biden's pick to be vice president. I think those will come to be apparent. But also do your own homework.
Do your own
done in a lot of
homework.
institutions and about this.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at there. Everybody, you heard it here. Do your own homework. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to write me, Tamar at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com or info at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom!
Okay, wait a minute.
Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling for the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.